Okay, we're live. How is everybody? Um, so I want to read from the I Ching, and I'm really struggling. Too much information, yeah. Too many choices. Absolutely. Um, it's been quite the whirlwind. But we're all preparing for something. So I got number 39, and I'm going to read it. Obstruction. The hexagram pictures a dangerous abyss lying before us and a steep, inaccessible mountain rising behind us. We are surrounded by obstacles. At the same time, since the mountain has the attribute of keeping still, there is implicit a hint as to how we can extricate ourselves. The hexagram represents obstructions that appear in the course of time, but that can and should be overcome. Therefore, all the instructions given is directed to overcoming them. The judgment. Obstruction. The southwest furthers. The northeast does not further. It furthers one to see the great man. Perseverance brings good fortune. The southwest is the region of retreat. The northeast that of advance. Here an individual is confronted by obstacles that cannot be overcome directly. In such a situation, it is wise to pause in view of the danger and to retreat. However, this is merely a preparation for overcoming the obstructions. One must join forces with friends of like mind and put himself under the leadership of a man equal to the situation. Then one will succeed in removing the obstacles. This requires the will to persevere, just when one apparently must do something that leads away from his goal. This unswerving inner purpose brings good fortune in the end. An obstruction that lasts only for a time is useful for self-development. This is the value of adversity. The image, water on the mountain, the image of obstruction. Thus, the superior man turns his attention to himself and molds his character. Difficulties and obstructions throw a man back upon himself, while the inferior man seeks to put the blame on other persons, bewailing his fate. The superior man seeks the error within himself, and through this introspection, the external obstacle becomes for him an occasion for inner enrichment and education. The lines. 6 at the beginning means going leads to obstructions. Coming meets with praise. When one encounters an obstruction, the important thing is to reflect on how best to deal with it. When threatened with danger, one should not strive blindly to go ahead, for this only leads to complications. The correct thing is, on the contrary, to retreat for a time being, not in order to give up the struggle, but to await the right moment for action. 6 in the second place means the king's servant is beset by obstruction upon obstruction, but it is not his own fault. Ordinarily, it is best to go around an obstacle and try to overcome it along the line of least resistance. But there is one instance in which a man must go out to meet the trouble, even though difficulty piles upon difficulty. This is when the path of duty leads directly to it. In other words, when he cannot act of his own volition, but is duty bound to go and seek out danger in the service of a higher cause. Then he may do it without compunction, because it is not through any fault of his that he is putting himself in this difficult situation. 9 at the third means going leads to obstructions, hence he comes back. while the preceding line shows the official compelled by duty to follow the way of danger. This line shows the man who must act as father of a family or as head of his kin. If he were to plunge recklessly into danger, it would be a useless act because those entrusted to his care cannot get along by themselves. But if he withdraws and turns back to his own, they welcome him with great joy. 6 in the fourth place means going leads to obstructions. Coming leads to union. This too describes a situation that cannot be managed single-handedly. In such a case, the direct way is not the shortest. If a person were to forge ahead on his own strength and without the necessary preparations, he would not find the support he needs and would realize too late that he has been mistaken in his calculations, inasmuch as the conditions on which he hoped he could rely would prove to be inadequate. In this case, it is better, therefore, to hold back for the time being and to gather together trustworthy companions who can be counted upon for help in overcoming the obstructions. 9 in the fifth place means, in the midst of the great obstructions, friends come. Here we see a man who is called to help in an emergency. He should not seek to evade the obstructions, no matter how dangerously they pile up before him. But because he is really called to the task, the power of his spirit is strong enough to attract helpers, whom he can effectively organize, so that through the well-directed cooperation of all participants, the obstruction is overcome. 6 at the top means going leads to obstructions, coming leads to great good fortune. It furthers one to see the great man. This refers to a man who has already left the world and its tumult behind him. When the time of obstructions arrives, it might seem that the simplest thing for him to do would be to turn his back on the world and take refuge in the beyond. But this road is barred to him. He must not seek his own salvation and abandon the world to its adversity. Duty calls him back once more into the turmoil of life. Precisely because of his experience and inner freedom, he is able to create something both great and complete that brings good fortune. And it is favorable to see the great man in alliance with whom one can achieve the work of rescue. So what do you think? The I Ching speaks very directly and how to, win. That was actually the second one. The first one I got was number 28. And this one I actually got 2 lines. I got 2 9s. All right. 9 at the second and 9 at the third. Okay, number 28, Tao Kuo, preponderance of the great. The joyous lake above, and below the sun, the gentle wood. This hexagram consists of 4 strong lines inside and 2 weak lines outside. When the strong are outside and the weak are inside, all is well. And there is nothing out of balance, nothing extraordinary in this situation. Here, however, the opposite is the case. The hexagram represents a beam that is thick and heavy in the middle, but too weak at the ends. It is a condition that cannot last. It must be changed, must pass, or misfortune will result. The judgment. Preponderance of the great. The ridgepole sags to the breaking point. If there's one, to have somewhere to go. Success. The weight of the man is excessive. The weight of the great is excessive. The load is too heavy for the strength of the supports. The ridgepole on which the whole roof rests sags to the breaking point because its supporting ends are too weak for the load they bear. It is an exceptional time and situation. Therefore, extraordinary measures are demanded. It is necessary to find a way of transition as quickly as possible and to take action. This promises success. For although the strong element is in excess, it is in the middle. That is, at the center of gravity, so that a revolution is not to be feared. Nothing is to be achieved by forcible measures. The problem must be solved by gentle penetration to the meaning of the situation, as is suggested by the attribute of the inner trigram, sun. Then the changeover to other conditions will be successful. It demands real superiority. Therefore, the time when the great preponderance is a momentous time. The image, the lake rises above the trees. The image of preponderance of the great, thus the superior man, when he stands alone, is unconcerned. And if he has to renounce the world, he is undaunted. Extraordinary times when the great preponderates are like flood times when the lake rises over the treetops. But such conditions are temporary. The two trigrams indicate the attitude proper to such exceptional times. The symbol of the trigram sun is the tree, which stands firm even though it stands alone. And the attribute of Tui is joyousness, which remains undaunted, even if it must renounce the world. The lines. 6 at the beginning means to spread white rushes underneath, no blame. When a man wishes to undertake an enterprise in extraordinary times, he must be extraordinarily cautious, just as when setting a heavy thing down on the floor. One takes care to put rushes underneath it so that nothing will break. This caution, though it may seem exaggerated, is not a mistake. Exceptional enterprises cannot succeed unless utmost caution is observed in their beginnings and in the laying of the foundations. 9 at the second. A dry poplar sprouts at the root. An older man takes a young wife. Everything furthers. Wood is near water, hence the image of an old poplar sprouting at the root. This means an extraordinary reanimation of the processes of growth. In the same way, an extraordinary situation arises when an older man marries a young girl who suits him. Despite the unusualness of the situation, all goes well. From the point of view of politics, the meaning is that in exceptional times, one does well to join with the lowly, for this affords a possibility of renewal. 9 at the third place, the ridgepole sags to the breaking point, misfortune. This indicates a type of man who in times of preponderance of the great insists on pushing ahead. He accepts no advice from others, and therefore they in turn are not willing to lend him support. Because of this, the burden grows until the structure of things bends or breaks. Plunging willfully ahead in times of danger only hastens the catastrophe. 9 in the fourth place means the ridgepole is braced, good fortune. If there are ulterior motives, it is humiliating. Through friendly relations with people of lower rank, a responsible man succeeds in becoming master of the situation. But if, instead of working for the rescue of the whole, he were to misuse his connections to obtain personal power and success, it would lead to humiliation. 9 in the fifth place means a withered poplar puts forth flowers. An older woman takes a husband. No blame, no praise. A withered poplar that flowers exhausts its energies, thereby it only hastens its end. And an older woman may marry once more, but no renewal takes place. Everything remains barren. Thus, Though all the amenities are observed, the net result is only the anomaly of the situation. Applied to politics, the metaphor means that if in times of insecurity we give up alliance with those below us and keep up only the relationships we have with people of higher rank, an unstable situation is created. 6 at the top means one must go through the water. It goes over one's head. Misfortune, no blame. Here is a situation in which the unusual has reached a climax. One is courageous and wishes to accomplish one's task, no matter what happens. This leads into danger. The water rises over one's head. This is the misfortune. But one incurs no blame in giving up one's life that the good and the right may prevail. There are things that are more important than life. Wow. So in doing that, I do want to read the commentary of that, because that's like getting the death card in the tarot, and you have to qualify it and like, okay, because we don't understand death, like they do here, that can be scary. So yeah, there's a flood coming. There is a natural disaster coming, and it doesn't change our necessity to still live true to ourselves, where the flower of life is growing in us. Doesn't matter what's happening out there, but there could be something, all right? The preponderance of the great. The 9 in the second place is firm, central, but not too heavy. The 9 in the fourth place is a beam that does not sag to the breaking point. Without provision of nourishment, here's the sequence. Without provision of nourishment, one cannot move. Hence, there follows the hexagram of preponderance of the great. Nourishing without putting to use, finally, evokes movement. Movement without end leads, finally, too far, to overweighting. Miscellaneous notes. Preponderance of the great is the peak. The peak refers to the image of the ridgepole mentioned in the judgment. The hexagram shows great strength within. Both the nuclear trigram Chen, whose attribute is strength, but underneath is the gentle sun, penetrating indeed, but ethereal as well, while above is the joyous lake. Thus the outer ends are not equal to the weight of the strong structure within, hence the great in preponderance. This hexagram is the opposite of the preceding one. The preceding one, number 27, is providing nourishment, the corners of the mouth. E. So, appended judgments. In ancient times, the dead were buried by covering them quickly with brushwood and placing them in the open country, without burial mound or grove of trees. The period of mourning had no definite duration. The holy men of the later time introduced inner and outer coffins instead. They probably took this from the hexagram of the preponderance of the great. This hexagram represents wood that has penetrated below groundwater. This gives the image of a coffin. Another explanation holds that the 2 yin lines above and below represent the earth and the trees of the burial place, while the yang lines in between indicate the coffin. When the dead are thus well cared for, they enter the earth and are happy. This hexagram is the opposite of the preceding one in this further respect. The former shows the provisions of nourishment for the living, and the present one shows the care provided for the dead. The judgment. Preponderance of the great. The ridgepole sags to the breaking point. It furthers one to have somewhere to go. Success. Commentary on the decision. Preponderance of the great. The great preponderates. The ridgepole sags to the breaking point because beginning and end are weak. The firm preponderates and is central, gentle and joyous in action. Then it furthers one to have somewhere to go. Then one has success. Great indeed is the time of preponderance of the great. The name is explained on the basis of the structure. The great, that is the yang element, outnumbers with its 4 lines, the 2 lines of the yin element. This by itself would not mean preponderance, but the great is within, although it belongs without. Similarly, the small preponderates, like in hexagram 62, when weak lines are in the majority and without, for by their nature they belong within. As representing preponderance of the great, the hexagram suggests the image of a ridgepole, the top beam of a house on which the whole roof rests. Since beginning and end are weak, there arises the danger of a too great inner weight and of consequent sagging to the breaking point. Despite this extraordinary situation, action is important. If the weight were to remain where it is, misfortune would arise. By means of movement, however, one gets out of the abnormal condition, chiefly because the ruler in the lower hexagram is central and strong. The attributes of the trigrams, joyousness and gentleness, also indicate the right behavior for successful action. The image, the lake, rises above the trees, the image of preponderance of the great. Thus, the superior man, when he stands alone, is unconcerned, and if he has to renounce the world, he is undaunted. The ideas of standing alone and of renunciation of the world are derived from the situation indicated by the hexagram as a whole. Standing alone, unconcerned, is suggested by the symbol of sun, the tree, and undauntedness by the attribute of tui, joyousness. The lines. 6 at the beginning. To spread white rushes underneath, no blame. To spread white rushes underneath, the yielding is underneath. The yielding line under the strong ruler of the hexagram, the 9 in the 2nd place, indicates that the load is set down with caution. Confucius says about this line, it does well enough simply to place something on the floor. But if one puts white rushes underneath, how could that be a mistake? This is the extreme of caution. Rushes in themselves are worthless, but they can have a very important effect. If one is as cautious as this in all that one does, one remains free of mistakes. 9 in the 2nd place. A dry poplar sprouts at the root. An older man takes a young wife. Everything furthers. An older man takes a young wife. The extraordinary thing is their coming together. The trigram for wood stands under the trigram for water, hence the image of the poplar, which grows near water. This line has the relationship of holding together at the beginning, the yin. On the one hand, it produces the image of a root sprouting afresh from below, and so renewing the life process. On the other hand, it represents an older man who takes a young girl to wife. And although this is something out of the ordinary, everything is favorable. 9 in the 3rd place, the ridgepole sags to the breaking point, misfortune. The misfortune of the sagging and breaking of the ridgepole is due to its finding no support. The 3rd and the 4th line, occupying the middle of the hexagram, represent the ridgepole. All right, so we're going to end the stream. I'll be back.